Wix Studio, one end-to-end web creation platform for your agency to deliver exceptional work with absolute efficiency.
The #1 long-form writer that helps SEOs outrank competition at the click of a button using real-time research and NLP. Start ranking content today with contentatScale.ai.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. An interesting intro as well. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about why web accessibility matters in SEO. I'm also going to talk about it in a broader term as well. But a bit of a background about what we do at Made by Studio. We build high-performing, responsible websites, so we really focus on the technical excellence in terms of kind of the accessibility and the sustainability of the websites that we're building. So every single step in our processes has these considerations from beginning straight to the end, just making sure we're doing the right things for the right people as well as the planet. But in terms of who we do that for, we work with companies like big and small, from like international organizations to like small local mental health charities. But more recently, we just work in green tech and med tech because if we're going to be doing something every day, we want to be doing it for the right reasons as well as helping the planet. But if we get into the kind of accessibility aspect of this talk, I'm going to start off with a few facts and figures. So 96.3% of homepages have detected web content accessibility guideline 2 failures. So this was tested across 1 million websites by WebAIM in 2022, and they released the report in 2023. Now, the next thing I want you to consider is that 24% of people in the UK have a disability. And this is from the GovUK Family Resources. And the final thing I want you to consider is the web is fundamentally designed to work for all people, not most people. And when the web follows these standards, it works for people from different backgrounds, different cognitive abilities, and different disabilities. As it is now, with 96.3% of homepages with web content accessibility guideline 2 failures, it isn't following the fundamentals of what the web is built for. And it's our role as designers, developers, marketers, SEOs to solve this problem because everyone deserves the right to equal access of information, and that's not currently how the web is working. And one thing I want to flag up as well is this kind of rise of accessibility overlays, which if you don't know what they are, they can magically solve your accessibility by installing a script on your website. And they say they make your website kind of ADA compliant, which is like the American Disability Act, and it's basically hiding a bigger problem. Some companies think you can just install this and that is all their accessibility problems completely solved. That's not how it works. You're basically just kind of masking it and not solving the core problem of what they are. And I'm going to highlight 3 of the biggest problems with them right now. So the first one is, if someone requires accessibility functionality, they don't just need it on your website. They need it across every kind of program, every bit of website they use. So having this on your website where it's like kind of inverts the colors, changes the color contrast, makes the text bigger and smaller, changes the fonts to dyslexic fonts and stuff like that, it's very likely they already have the software installed on the computer to do that. You don't just need it on your website. So that's kind of the first one. The second one is they've got some artificial intelligence, as they say, behind the scenes, which kind of fill in the blanks. So let's say you've got missing alternative text on your images, or you've got missing or incorrect ARIA labels. They go in and try and solve it. Another thing with these is that there is no human interaction to check what the AI is doing is validated and correct. If the AI gets it wrong, it's providing misinformation, which in my opinion is worse than no information at all, because that user that requires the accessibility is going to go away with something wrong, and it's just not how it should work. So you need the human intervention to check that the content it's producing is validated and correct. And the third one, which is a bit more technical, is if you're using a framework such as like Vue, React, or Svelte, they're notoriously bad at tracking the state changes. So if you go from page A to page B, but you're using the similar components, it can still reference the wrong content on the previous page, and again, it's providing the misinformation. If you want to see a bit more about why these are terrible and why they're kind of really negatively affecting accessibility, there's a website called Overlay Fact Sheet, which just goes into like all the details and testimonials. And one thing it does highlight is that 7% of people with disabilities have said that these are completely useless and don't actually benefit them in any way, which kind of shows how pointless they are in most respects. So what I want to do is kind of highlight where accessibility actually starts. And we always talk about it in terms of kind of web design, web development, but it actually starts way back in that brand design phase, and like even before you've kind of designed a logo or typography. Because ultimately, accessibility is a mindset in a way. When you are starting a brand phase, you should be starting a conversation going, okay, how are we going to make this brand accessible all the way from that logo design we're picking, the typography, the color palette. So when you build that brand book and that brand guidelines, you have a dedicated part that says, this is how we make this brand accessible, which I've seen loads of brand guidelines and stuff, and very rarely they have a dedicated section. And if you don't have that, when it goes to the web design phase, you're going to miss out on some accessibility considerations because that kind of guidance and that mindset isn't there. And then when that gets passed on to the web developer, they're not going to have those considerations. And the accessibility gets worse and worse and worse because you're not considering it throughout. And then when we get all the way to the end to like SEOs and marketers, and when you're finally doing those audits going, has what we built, is it accessible? You'll find all these violations and failures and stuff like that. And you're going to have to backtrack all the way back down the line to the design phase to make sure your color palette's accessible. You're going to have to start recoding some components to make sure they're accessible. And you're basically doubling up the work, which is, in terms of business case, it's not cost effective. So it's much easier to do it right from the beginning and have it as a consideration all the way through the process. So on to the kind of the SEO element as well. I'm going to highlight the biggest kind of technical SEO violations that we see on home pages. So the first one is that 58.2% have missing alternative text for images. 50.1% have empty links. 42.2% have skipped or no heading levels, so that could be like multiple H1s. It could go from like H1, H3, H6, or just none at all. And then the fourth one is 27.5% have empty buttons. So again, for accessibility, if someone's using assistive technology and they want to click that button and nothing happens, it's going to cause confusion. So you need to make sure they're filled in. And the final one is 18.6 have a missing document language, which again is important for that technical SEO element. Now, what I'm going to do is highlight the accessibility violations on home pages. So from this here, so all these stats actually come from the WebAIM 1 million report. And you can see that 5 of the 6 are kind of directly related across accessibility and technical SEO. The one that I've not highlighted is the low contrast text, but I'd kind of argue that it is the role of an SEO to check this as well, because it comes into the user experience, and ultimately that is going to affect the search engine optimization as a whole. So you kind of need to be considering the accessibility of what you're doing as an SEO as well, because it's going to benefit you in several different ways and give you a better return on investment in what you're doing. And I'm going to just highlight this intersection of accessibility and SEO in a little bit more detail. So I've kind of gone through the WCAG 2.2 guidelines, which got released, I think, this month actually, or last month, and picked out some of the key elements which have a crossover in terms of technical SEO. The WCAG 2 guidelines are massive, so I couldn't pick out like every single bit because it's like reams and reams and reams of pages. But you can see where, like, for example, clear page titles, that is kind of a key consideration you need to have in accessibility, but it's also a key consideration you have to have in SEO when you're writing that content. You've got structured headings, which again is pretty kind of basic stuff in technical SEO. It is also the basic stuff in accessibility, so you need to be having these considerations. I'm not going to go through like every single one in detail, but you can kind of just see where this crossover is. And there is a lot more to this. I just didn't have enough space on the screen to kind of just go through every single one. So another thing I want to highlight as well is accessibility isn't just for those with disabilities, which is quite a common misconception. But accessibility is for every single individual on the web. And there is also these kind of edge case scenarios which people they forget to consider when they're designing or doing kind of their SEO work and whatnot. And the first one is there is things called situational impairment. So, for example, if you got a train down to Brighton and you forgot your headphones or your headphones were broken, and you wanted to watch a video, but if it has like incorrect captions or it has no captions at all, you wouldn't be able to really watch that unless you had like no social awareness and you decided just to watch that video full blast to everyone on the train, which I don't think people would enjoy, unless you're like a train full of SEOs, obviously. It's going to frustrate people and it's going to frustrate yourself, so you can't really watch it. And that is kind of the everyday life of someone with hearing loss. If you don't have that captions, if they're incorrect as well, they're not going to be able to kind of view that content. They're not going to be able to get context. The second one is there is temporary impairments as well. So I was cycling down in Devon a few weeks ago and we went to a pub and one of my mates decided to kind of cycle back. She wanted to ram her boyfriend off her bike for some reason, and she decided, well, she tried it and it just knocked her off instead, and she broke her dominant arm. When she went to the hospital and she got back, she couldn't actually use her phone because her dominant arm was broken. So what we had to do was enable accessibility features on her phone. So she found it easier doing that because she wasn't used to using her left arm of the phone, to allow her to kind of skip through the content and use Apple iPhone's standard accessibility features that are already on the device, and it made it easier for her. And there's these kind of like little edge case scenarios that you've got to consider in accessibility, so it isn't just for those that have disabilities. And I'm going to ask a very obvious question, which is, can poor accessibility negatively affect SEO? Yeah, it can, because there is such a correlation between accessibility and SEO that they're going to be affecting one another. So if you're doing good accessibility work and you're having a really good consideration, it's going to benefit your technical SEO. If you're really focusing on your technical SEO and making it the best it can be, a part of that will be taking consideration of the accessibility as well. So they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, really. So that's just another thing to consider. And there's a tweet from John, who sat literally right there.
No pressure.
Hopefully I've interpreted this correctly, but someone posed the question in 2020, does accessibility affect your search results? And John's response is, I won't say never, but I'm not aware of any immediate plans. In general, though, when sites are hard to use, people steer away from them anyway. So over time, things like recommendations and other signals tend to drop away, resulting in a site being less visible in search too. So my interpretation of this, hopefully it's correct, John, is that if you have good consideration of accessibility, you are providing a better user experience as a whole, which will be benefiting your search results and hopefully making it more visible to Google search engine and stuff like that. He's nodding, so that's correct. Thank you. And one thing I want you to take away, if you're going to take away anything from this talk, is the 4 principles of accessibility. And this is how you kind of keep this consideration and mindset through every single step of the process. So the first one is your website perceivable? So can it be used via multiple senses? We always think, can the website just be used by keyboard and mouse and touch? But you've got to consider every other single sense out there, like different screen readers, different assistive technologies, and you've got to be able to use it by the multiple senses. Is it operable? So in terms of kind of navigating between pages, is the navigation bar predictable? People don't like these kind of sporadic websites where you've got like 30 different components, all with slight variations, because that causes confusion. The better way to design a website is that you have a small, streamlined amount of components which are predictable. So let's say someone interacts with those components kind of 3 times. After those 3 times, they understand exactly what action is going to happen. If you have too much variation, they're going to be confused when it's a different kind of reaction, and it makes it a very difficult user experience. The next one is it understandable. And so let's say you've kind of got page titles. They need to explicitly define what's going to be coming up on the page. You can't just have like one-word titles and hope for the best. Same with kind of button links and stuff like that. Rather than having buttons that just says read more or click here, it needs to explicitly define the action. So it's going to be read more about X topic and stuff like that. So just kind of over-explain in some cases. But that's the best way to provide an accessible solution. And then the final one is the accessibility robust enough. So in a perfect world, we have infinite budget to consider the accessibility and get it implemented, although that's not really the case. So you have to do as much as you can in terms of accessibility. And there are tools out there to make it easier, but in the perfect scenario, you can get different people with different kind of disabilities, cognitive abilities to test the website. But if you can't do that, I've got a few tools that just kind of can help you out. So the first one is the IBM Equal Access Accessibility Checker. So if you're already in accessibility, you would know of the Wave tool. I personally find the user experience of that quite difficult because it's very clunky. So IBM have released their own accessibility tool where they've taken the WCAG 2.2 guidelines and done their own additional work on top of that. And it's really powerful. So it works exactly like a lighthouse audit. You run it and it just tells you exactly where all like the technical SEO elements are going wrong. It gives you the code snippets of how to fix it, and it actually tells you why this code snippet is fixing it. So it gives you the context, and then that is what kind of helps you understand that accessibility in a bit more detail. And then that actually comes from the IBM Equal Access Toolkit as well. So again, IBM been doing their own research, and it basically allows you to kind of understand how you can implement accessibility through the planning, design, develop, verify, and launch phase. So it is kind of a step-by-step process of how you can do this across all the websites and digital products you are delivering, and just kind of making sure that it is robust enough. But one thing I want to highlight is accessibility isn't a checkbox exercise. If you hit all these kind of tick marks, that doesn't mean you've got a perfect accessibility. You still have to do that kind of human verification to ensure that it is accessible, to make sure you are doing kind of enough and you are confident that what you're providing is accessible. And then if you're very new to accessibility, Chrome Developer Relations have built this guidebook website where you can go in from step-by-step process of how to learn about accessibility from the basic stuff to the more complex stuff. In my opinion, that anyone that is working on websites or in tech, if you're like a designer, developer, marketer, SEO, should have a read of this and just understand the basics, because that, again, is what is creating the mindset of accessibility. And you can kind of implement that into everything that you are doing. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.